I know all of you signed up for this class because you heard how great of a professor I am, right? I'm going to mark down who laughs, Tatiana. I can see from here. And unlike some of the other folks in this department, I'm not so old, despite my hair color too, I'm not so old that I've lost my hearing. So if you sit back there, Caleb, and you scoff at what I'm saying, I can hear that. Right, Aspen? You know, you've been in my class before, so be careful. So why today are we going to talk about crustacean models of aggression? Why do we care about crustaceans, right? Why is that important? Okay. Well, if we're studying aggression and we're going to think about aggression, right? We're going to think about primarily human aggression, right? Most of you are here. Anybody not a psych major? All right. What's your weirdo major? Huh? Oh, health science. Well, you're still interested in human behavior, right? So everybody here is like human behavior is kind of at the top of your things that interest you, not, like two shrimp to fight each other, right? But what can you do, Zach? Let's think about this. Like you wanted to, because at some point you're going to think about like aggression models and maybe some kind of study you might want to do, right, to study aggression. And so let's imagine you think there's a certain drug, there's a certain chemical, there's a certain hormone that's going to make an individual more aggressive, right? So what might you do? You might go, I'm going to get two people together. I'm going to shoot one of them up with, aggression combo 1. No, right, Mason? They're not going to let me do that, right? You're already telling me that's a bad idea. And that's why I'm glad you're in this class, because no one else will tell me when I have a bad idea. They'll just let me keep going. That's a bad idea. We're not going to be able to do that, right? We're not going to be able to put two people in a pit and let them fight, right? That doesn't seem like the way we should do things. But maybe we can put two lobsters in a tank of water and let them fight, and we can learn something about that. Or we can just study, and that still may sound like something you don't want to do, but we can at least study natural situations with these other animals, right? And we can go, hey, this particular lobster was really aggressive, and he had really high levels of this particular hormone. I wonder if humans who have that, right? Maybe they're in the same situation, and then you can start to do some other studies and think about some other things, right? So we can really learn a lot, even studying something that you might think is as far removed from humans as crustaceans, right? They still do a lot of the same things you do, right? How many of you, and we're just thinking about you as a species, right? How many of you live in some sort of home? Right? That's a thing. Shelter, right? Our species typically goes for shelter. Crayfish do the same thing. They need shelter. How many of you eat? Right? Like that's a thing, right? And so these guys are also trying to acquire food resources, right? And this one, don't nod your heads at all, because the third thing I'm going to ask is how many of you mate, and that's when you don't, Caitlin, don't answer that one out loud, right? And let's just assume as a species you do, and that's how you got here. Crustaceans are going to do the same thing, right? They're also going to have sort of mating things that they do, and so that is going to show you those behavioral similarities, right? We're trying to solve some of the same problems. Are we doing it in a pile of mud at the bottom of a creek? No, we're doing it somewhere else, right? But it's still some of the same basic problems. All right, so that's why we want to look at these models, right? We're just using a crustacean as a model. Okay. So, what are crustaceans and why should we use them, right? It's a good question. Well, they typically include things like crayfish, also known as crawdads, right? That's the term for this region, right? Crawdads. So that's the same thing. Or sometimes crawfish, right? Sometimes the Y is replaced. They still go with the fish part, but they put the craw in the front. So there you go. Crabs, lobsters, and those are shrimp. Okay, so those are your crustaceans, right? So you want to think about those. Here we go. Here's a nice, beautiful picture, I think, of a crayfish, right? And you can see they have a variety of parts. They have organs and muscles, or at least tissue that sort of works in that way. Tails. You guys are fairly familiar with the setup, right, of a crustacean. Okay, you guys have all seen crabs, heard of crabs, right? So you know what we're talking about. So why should we use them? Well, they have easily observable behavior, right? You can put a crab in a tank of water, put it on a pile of sand, you can watch what it does. You can watch what it does for an extended period of time, right? It's fairly easy to observe. It's easy to observe that not just in a laboratory setting, but also in a natural setting, right? You can observe their behavior, which is kind of great. So we do want to observe their behaviors, and we can do that easily. They also have a very easy access nervous system, right? How many of you know anything about the nervous system of humans? Aspen, I expect your hand to go up, right? Because you took my physio class. I expect some information there. Saw a couple other hands go up. That makes me feel pretty good. The human nervous system is pretty complex, right? Anybody know how many neurons you have? Let's say 1 trillion. That's a good number, right? Doesn't really matter. It's too many to count. And that's not including like peripheral nerves, right? Okay. And that's also not figuring that, I mean, your nervous system is like how long, right? Like, well, however tall you are, right? That's how long your nervous system is. That's kind of the extent of that nervous system. It's fairly broad, right? And if we were to study from person to person to person to person and try to study the changes in our nervous system, we're not so great at that, right? Like individual differences. How many of you have ever looked at any sort of brain imaging studies? You know, they'll always say like, oh, this brain region is larger in folks who've been diagnosed with this, or this brain region's smaller in folks who've been diagnosed with this, right? There are some real problems with those kinds of studies. And a lot of those problems are the brain imaging techniques that we have. Yes, they can tell you that, you know, one lump's bigger than the other in a group of people, fine. But that doesn't tell you if it's the surface structure, if it's the structure underneath, right? So, you know, you can kind of think about how that might be different, right? In humans too, just because let's say your amygdala is bigger, right? That's an aggression area, that's a fear area. If your amygdala is bigger than somebody else, is that significant, right? I mean, what's that mean? So my amygdala is bigger than yours, whoop-de-doo, right? Does that really make a huge difference? I've got 200 more neurons in my amygdala than you, even if I could count all of the neurons in your amygdala, right? Like accurately. Does 200 more make a difference? I don't know, right? That's not something that we have that information yet. There are folks working on that. Whether or not that turns into anything, who knows? But most crustaceans have very simple nervous systems, right? They have a brain, sort of. They have a clump of nervous tissue up between their eyes, right? We'll call that a brain. It's not quite probably up there to brain standard, but you got a mass of nervous tissue there that goes different places. Typically, they have the same number of neurons from one member of the species to the next, right? So if you grab a whole bunch of crabs of the same species, their nervous system is going to be nearly identical from one to the other. So much so that they have specific names for each of the neurons in the nervous system for many crustacean species. We don't have that for humans, right? Because again, we have so many neurons, we're barely able to even have names for all of the different brain regions that handle different kinds of information. So when you look at crustaceans, they have a small number of neurons, and you can figure out what that individual neuron does, right? What that individual nerve cell does, right? And you can kind of adjust it up and down and change its behavior significantly. If I go in and I start pushing around on one neuron in your brain, it's probably not going to make a huge difference, right? I got to push on a handful of neurons at least before I can make any kind of observable difference. So that's awesome. We've got that easy access nervous system, and we've got those identifiable neurons, right? They're all in the same place. They're easy to get to, right? Okay. Have you ever seen the nervous system of a crayfish? All you got to do is just like rip that part up, right? Just go poof, and there it is. It's all right in there, easy for you to get to. Okay. Questions about that? Comments, concerns? Anybody eating seafood tonight?
That's the stuff you gotta get out with your phone.
Out of the head? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it right there. You're just squirting out of brain. I don't know. You just don't think about this stuff. You should. All right. We're really interested, though, in like aggression, right? And if we're thinking about aggression, we talked last week about offensive and defensive behaviors, right? Talked about different kinds of things. As we go through the semester, we'll talk about different kinds of aggression, different kinds of behaviors. Okay. One thing that we do want to think about are what kind of weapons are available, right, to a particular species. So when we're thinking about the types of offensive or defensive behaviors that they might exhibit, we need to keep in mind their environment, their natural habitat, and their body plan, right? What are the things they can do? What are the things they have at their disposal, right? And so what are some cool things that are unique to crustaceans, or at least this combination is unique to crustaceans? Armor, right? That's one of the most annoying things about crabs, right? The meat's not easy for you to get to. They wrap it up in that hard shell and you got to crack it, right? Why'd they do that? It just seems like a lot of effort for me to eat something tasty. That's why crabs are a disappointment to me, Aspen. So they have that armor, right? That's pretty awesome. That's great for defensive purposes. Kind of protects them in offensive situations as well, right? So they have that very nice hard shell. Then they have claws. How many of you have ever been on the wrong end of a claw from a crustacean? Yeah, it happens, right? It's not the most pleasant experience, okay, right? Those claws, they can do a couple things with them. One, they have the pincher, right? And so they can inflict some damage to other members of their species. They can also whack each other with those claws, right? Some of those claws are quite large, and here in this particular example, one claw is typically larger than the other, right? We kind of see that. That's sort of a standard thing. Sometimes they're even. But if you have one claw or your claws are big, you can hit your opponents with that claw, and you can also kind of clamp at them, right? So you can kind of do both things. So it's kind of a, it's like a double kind of weapon there, which is pretty cool. What about water jets, right? Sounds like something nice. Certain shrimp, for example, will create jets of water that I know, right? It's pretty cool. And they'll squirt that jet of water at another shrimp and try to blast it back. Those water streams can actually be quite intense, right? And they can really inflict some damage on the other, shrimp. So imagine, like somebody knocking off the the cap on a fire hydrant or something, right? We're talking about a real nice sort of concussive blow with a jet stream there, right? Antenna. Nobody really thinks about antennas being a weapon, right? Okay. But hermit crabs in particular will kind of whack on each other's shells if they want to. And it's kind of irritating, right? If you can imagine for a moment that you're a hermit crab and you're just minding your own business, but you're going too slow, for example, or you're hogging up some resources, and then another hermit crab comes over and starts whacking you with their antenna, right? They can do that. Other species will do similar things. They will use their antenna as a weapon as well. Probably not this species. Look how small those antennae are. That's probably not going to do much good. But you got to think about a crustacean with larger antennae, right? And they could potentially, if not inflict damage, at least get your message across, right? Because, Caitlin, we have to remember, aggression is not just about putting people in headlocks and punching their face. It's about all the things you do up to that point, right? Like strutting around and trying to, growl at the other members of your species, right? Whatever it is you do, right? These displays that lead up to that point, right? And so, whacking each other with antennas apparently is something of value. We also have tail flaps, right? This crustacean doesn't have a tail. The one we saw in the previous slide did, right? I know, Mason, I'm afraid some people will, you're all psych majors, not bio majors, so I just want to make sure that no tail. So crustaceans with a tail, right? They'll use their tails to flap. Now, what's interesting about their tails, and we'll talk about this briefly, the tails actually can do two things, right? So not only can you use your tail to attack, but you can also use your tail to flee, right? Which is also a behavior that we might see in an aggressive interaction, right? We might see fleeing, okay? How many of you have been in an aggressive interaction and you've run away from that? It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, right? And you should run at the appropriate times to maintain survival, right? There are some times when you're having an aggressive situation and you're like, it's not worth it, right? You've got to evaluate. Remember, that evaluation process is what's important, right? And if you go, that parking spot's really nice, but that guy has a crowbar. And I don't know if like trying to stare him down for another 5 minutes is worth it, just so I can park 10 minutes, right? I can just go ahead and park farther away and just walk, and it's going to be fine, right? Right? It's probably safer. So you've got to balance that out, right? And so with the tail flaps, right? So you're either going to go like forward and attack with your tail, or you can kind of flee away, which is fine. What's interesting is even though it's the same part of the crustacean's body, the tail, it actually has different neurons coming down, some that are for attack and some that are for fleeing, right? So it's a completely different sort of nervous system connection there, which again goes back to one of the great advantages of crustaceans. They have those identifiable neurons, right? How many of you are going to go home and buy a bunch of hermit crabs and watch them fight each other? Hey, you want to hear a fun personal hermit crab story? Always important to put the word hermit in there. That makes it there we go. Somebody, it's a completely different story if you leave that word out, isn't it? So when I was a kid, we had, for whatever reason, my parents were not, they didn't really think ahead very much. Like just enough to keep me alive, but not so much as to like prevent me from doing interesting things. And for some reason, they let my sister and I have like 50 hermit crabs once. I swear it was like 20 hermit crabs at once. And we had them in this giant tank, and we would get them out and just like watch them crawl around on the carpet because we thought that was cool, right? Again, I was like 8, so that was an interesting thing to do. What was actually really cool is we had a hermit crab that was like, I remember it as a kid being like the size of a softball. Now, whether or not it was actually that large or not is probably, me exaggerating from my youth, right? But it was much larger than the other hermit crabs, right? And if you're a larger hermit crab, well, there are two things you can do. If you're a larger hermit crab, you can eat whatever you want, and you can probably get whichever mates you want, right? But the cool thing about this particular hermit crab is it would like knock away the normal sized hermit crabs, so all the little hermit crabs could eat. It would like go and sit at the food dish. It was weird. Like go sit at the food dish and like knock away and fight off the like the normal size, like large hermit crabs. They're like this big, and then we had like some small. You've seen the smaller ones, and then they would come up and like eat the food. And I don't know. It was just, yeah. It was really like it was a massive hermit crab.
Have you seen the other crustacean that it doesn't actually, what it does is it punches?
Oh yeah,
and it breaks the sound barrier, and it can crack in it. Mantis shrimp, I think. Mantis shrimp.
It's a mantis shrimp. Yeah.
It breaks the sound barrier.
Yeah. No, those are shrimp, right? I think they're called mantis shrimp. It's kind of a fun thing to. Let's see. Specialized calcified clubs. Yeah, so let's see if we can. Nat Geo Wild. I feel like I can click on that video, right? Like there are some videos I'm afraid to click on when I search for stuff. I'm like I'm not certain if I should show that, especially some of the things I.
Despite being only 6 inches long, pound for pound, he packs the biggest punch in the natural world. This is the peacock mantis shrimp. He's actually neither a shrimp nor a mantis, but stomatopod just doesn't have the same ring to it.
It's still a crustacean, a stomatopod.
This guy's biggest problem right now is real estate. There are more shrimps here than there are crannies for them to claim. In a hot market, you have to move fast. All that activity works up an appetite. Time to bring out the big guns. He's armed with the most sophisticated vision of any predator on Earth and the fastest strike. his eyes work independently and together to better target his prey. These eyes detect more colors than any creature on Earth and see polarized light. He closes in on his target. The mantis unloads the ace up his sleeve. Hammer claws. His spring-loaded clubs strike 50 times faster than we can blink. For a moment, the surrounding water reaches the temperature of the surface of the sun. You heard that right. This crab is toast.
Yeah, it's those guys mean business, right? I mean, it's
Is that like the last few years they were like jet sounds everywhere?
I know, right? Like, what is the last thing you're going to hear, right? Is it going to be the flying fist of a shrimp? I don't know. I mean, it's a rough way to go. I mean, it's just. But I think that shows you the sort of the power of some of these weapons, right? That we think about with crustaceans. You kind of laugh off some of these things, you know. But have you ever tried to crack through a crab shell? Like that's pretty intense, right? And Mason, I think the other important thing was that's in water. Have you ever tried to punch somebody underwater? It's almost impossible.
You can make contact, but it's just.
It's almost impossible. Yeah, and those they're moving so fast underwater, they're puncturing the hard shell that other crab was living in. I mean, that's impressive, right? Yeah.
I want to see somebody hit somebody like up here so fast that like the surrounding air.
It just instantly, it's the sun, right? I mean, if you could punch that fast, I mean, you could like bake a whole turkey, you know, just like with a couple like quick chops. I mean, and you're like, whoa, it's cooked.
Yeah.
So there, I don't know. That's good business, right? So there you go. Maybe we should change our mascot from the thundering herd to the punching shrimp. I mean, that seems so intimidating, right? I don't think they're going for that. But I'll start a petition. They'll listen to me. Yeah, so there you go. So that, I think, was actually a great video, Mason. Thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't really intended on showing that, but I think that was a fun one just to kind of demonstrate to you, A, what is a crustacean? B, what are some of their weapons? And then, hey, let's go to the next slide. And let's see some of the reasons they might actually try to exhibit aggressive behaviors, right? One of those, at the beginning of that video, it mentioned real estate, right? It talked about shelter. Now, it didn't show, and I wish it had, two of those shrimps fighting each other. I mean, that would have been, I know, it would have been impressive, right? I mean, that would have been, you guys thought Foreman Ali was a fight. No, you didn't, because none of them are, thanks, Mason. I appreciate that. Okay, you saw it. These people didn't. They're like, oh, that movie Will Smith was in. No, not that one. So, yeah, so real estate, shelter, right? what's interesting is different species will be more or less likely to fight over shelter depending on the availability of that shelter, right? If you're a species and your environment is full of cool rocks for you to hide under, and you go over and you find somebody else has a great looking rock and you're like, well, I'm going to fight for that rock. And then you go like, nah, probably not, right? Because, hey, there's another rock right next to it. And it's just easier for you to just move to another rock, right? And there are actually spiders like this. So they will, these spiders in Mexico, they'll kind of move around and they'll find like another spider who's got like a cool place to live. And they'll kind of like, hey, what are we going to do? And the spider who lives there is like, there's a better place probably just right over here. You can have this one. I'll just go and leave. And they never fight because there's always another place for them to go to. Now, when you're kind of short on cool places to live, there's pretty big competition, right? Anybody here tried to buy a house in Huntington? No, I didn't think any of you had. Don't. And the reason is the 4 cool houses to live in are going to cost you more than you'll ever make in your lifetime, right? Because you want to live in a place that's got a good school district and that's safe, right? And there are 4 houses like that in the whole city. And somebody owns them and they want to sell them to you. I'm certain, Aspen, but it's far more than you can afford, right? So in an environment where there's a shortage of desirable places to live, you're going to have some economic aggression, right? People are going to come in and they're going to make bids above asking price, right? If you live in a city where like everybody's got great housing, all of the school districts are great, everywhere you live there's an awesome hospital in case you get hurt, you're not going to have a lot of competition, right? Somebody's going to try to sell a house, and you're like, well, I guess it's okay, but there's probably a better one. It's going to be for sale in a couple weeks. I'll just wait. Okay, so you're not going to fight as much. But shelter, that's one of the number one things that individuals will fight over of any species, particularly crustaceans. Second is mates. Okay, that doesn't mean they're going to fight their mates. That's different. That's not something we're going to talk about with crustaceans, right? This is when typically male crustaceans will fight each other for access to mates, right? We talked, did we talk last week about deer? Right, we talked about the deer last week, right? And they bark at each other 3,000 times, and then they're like, okay, then we'll try to line up next to each other and see who's the taller deer, and then if that doesn't work, then we'll just run into each other until somebody dies. So it's such a great strategy, right? So think about that the next time you're trying to attract a mate. Find whoever your competition is, yell at them 3,000 times a day. Then stand next to each other, kind of walk side by side, kind of that lateral display. And then if that's not enough to tip the scales one way or the other, just start running at each other, head on, see what happens. And whichever one of you, makes it through, great job. So, mates. The second thing is not just are they going to fight each other to get access to mates, they will fight to protect their mates, right? And so there's a thing called mate guarding. So once you have obtained a mate, okay, and you have shelter, so you're going to put that mate in the shelter, right? And you've done whatever it is crustaceans do, right? And the female is waiting there. She's loaded up with some fertilized eggs, right? As the male, you're going to kind of pace around the door of your shelter and fend off anybody, right? So one, you want to protect the offspring that you created. If you have a mate who's in the house and she's fertile and willing, right? You're gonna want to watch the door. You don't want 2 entries because somebody will slip in the other door and while you're not looking, right? So you have one way in and one way out. You're gonna protect that door and try to keep other invading males from coming in, right? Because you don't want them. And then you're gonna waste your time protecting this female who's carrying somebody else's baby crawfish, right? That doesn't seem like a logical thing to do from a, sort of a natural selection process, right? And that makes a lot of sense, right? How many of you, well, you don't have to answer this, but let's think about humans, right? If you're a human and you have a mate, what do? You do things to maintain that mate, right? To try to keep that individual around and interested in you. You might, whether you admit it or not, do things to keep other potential mates away from them, right? This is particularly we think about sexual jealousy, right? That's a pretty common thing to think about. Unfortunately, it leads to a lot of really bad situations from time to time, right? So I think knowing about it ahead of time can help you, like, hey, wait a minute, why is it I hate that guy? And then maybe like really dig into that and think about it for a few moments, right? And so I think, we can think about the analogs in human behavior here as well. Why did I put on there size matters? The bigger the crustacean, the more likely it is to beat up another crustacean, right? And it's that simple.
And I feel like that's why like you automatically know you don't want to smoke that vantage shrimp. Because okay, so you can be like above average, but like you're still like a regular shrimp. I mean, let you think, oh, okay, it's the last spot, I'm about to get this, and then let you see a mantis shrimp pop out of that spot. I mean, like, that's before you even know that, like, it'll hit you so hard that you're like...
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, you're just like, I'm not going to mess with that guy.
Yeah, and you said size matters. Well, size, I mean, for the fight, sure it would.
Yeah.
But for the size, I would think it would be more like a pumping in the chest. Bigger.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments, right? Because there are, Mason, and we're talking about within a single species, right? We're not talking about comparing like a giant lobster to like a small shrimp, right? We're thinking about two big lobsters or two shrimp of the same size, relatively same size. They will do, like crabs will do a thing where they'll kind of like line up against each other and they'll spread their claws out, right? And that's what they do. And whoever's got it's called a mural spread. And whoever's claws stretch out farther, the other one's probably, again, going to go, well, you probably got me there. So I'm probably not even going to try it because I'm not even going to get in close enough to try to, pinch you, and you're just going to, clip off an antenna or something. So a lot of it is display, right? Not even like once the interaction happens, a lot of it's just displaying that, you're bigger, particularly in the claws. So there you go. Big claws. I can just imagine some of you like getting big foam claws now and like walking around campus like with these giant claws, like trying to impress people. I will say that's not typically a way to get a mate. I just want to throw that out there in case somebody was going to try that. You're welcome to try it. Tell me the results.
You just do it with trucks.
Trucks? It's not bad. Drive around in a bigger truck? I don't know. So, hermit crabs. Why were we going to talk about hermit crabs? We talked about hermit crabs. We talked about the shell wrapping, molting and reproduction, right? So what do we mean by molting? So at some point, crabs will kind of shed their exoskeleton and grow a new one, right? And so that's actually sort of a dangerous time. And in fact, this mate guarding and aggression in males will increase if their mate is molting or participating in some sort of reproductive activity in terms of developing baby crayfish or whatever, right? So when let's say the female's molting, she's back in the shelter, the male will be much more aggressive in guarding that mate, right? Because that's a vulnerable sort of situation there. That makes a lot of sense, right? So what do we want to think about sort of development of aggression, right? And what do I mean by crayfish in a hole are better than on the loose? What I mean by that is if you are a crayfish and you have a hole, you're more likely to survive, you're more likely to get food and be able to protect that, and you're more likely to mate. So as a crayfish, it's better to have a hole than to be just out wandering around, right? You need some place to kind of anchor yourself. So early on, crayfish that are more aggressive, right, will be more successful during those early developmental phases, even before they reach like sexual maturity, right? So they're still going to be more aggressive because they want that shelter, they want that kind of anchor, that place. Okay, it's sort of a positive feedback situation. What do I mean by that, right? So let's imagine there was a situation where you were aggressive as a crayfish, and what did that get for you? Well, they got you resources. They got you the things you need. Guess what you're going to do the next go round? you're going to be aggressive again, right? And you're going to try to be more aggressive because you think, well, I can get more resources that way, right? And so you see how it's this positive feedback loop. As you do one thing that's successful, you're like, okay, I'll try that again. And then you just keep trying and trying and trying. And every time that you get more and more resources out of those behaviors, you're going to keep doing that. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So there are a few things that we can look at. We can look at axonal diameter changes. So we talked about those different axons that go to the tail, for example, right? So they're going to kind of come down and go to the tail. And one of those is going to be to flee, and one of those is going to be attack. That should be a K here, not attach. Attack. What will happen over time if you are a crayfish that's been successful, right? That has successfully won some aggressive encounters. What will happen is this attack axon will start getting thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. Okay, and why that's important is thicker axons carry signals faster, right? And so they're better. And so we can see that that's a positive change. If you want to have that attack faster, more powerful attack, having a thicker axon makes sense. If you're a crayfish that continues to lose, right, the flee axon will start getting thicker and thicker, right? And you'll be more likely to go, I'm out of here, right? Because I know I'm going to lose. I'm out. Not even going to try. Okay? You can also look at like abdomen and claw size, right? The larger the claws relative to the abdomen, the typically the more successful the crayfish is. All right. Now, Mason, we're going to talk about some of that chest puffing, that signaling, right? How are we going to let another crab know I mean business and you shouldn't mess with me because I'm a tougher crab, right? Okay. One of those things, and this is the fun one, right? It's called, I know, right? Everybody's like looking at that. What's optical urine? So how many of you know what eyes are? Yeah, how many of you know what urine is? Yeah. Urine normally doesn't come out of your eye unless you're a lobster. And there are lobsters that will shoot urine out of their eyes, right? They'll do that during aggressive encounter. I know, right? Isn't that impressive? So you think about this. You know, like let's say you're getting ready to, you know, you're squaring up with somebody, right? I know. And then all of a sudden, two streams of this like acidic, hot, salty liquid shoot out of their eyes at you. What are you going to do? You're going to run away, right? You better run away because I mean, if you can make urine come out of your eyes, you mean business. I mean, that's serious, right? And there are lobsters that will do that. They'll just squirt urine straight out of their face, just right at you. 2 laser beams, right? Okay. And that's a signal, right? It's not that the urine itself is going to really do anything to you in this case, or you know, as a human or as a crustacean, but it's still saying, all right, we've escalated to a new level here, right? I understand you mean business about, you know, that hole you dug in the dirt. I don't know that it's worth it to me anymore if you're willing to pee out your face. So I'm going to move on. Also, and we'll talk a little bit about this as well, there are lobsters that can use urine for individual recognition. And what we mean by that is, like, how do you guys know each other? Like, how do you know it's another person? Your face, right? Humans use faces, okay? Right? Aspen, we've talked about this, right? We talked about facial recognition and so forth. If you're a chimpanzee, you use butt wrinkles, right? So chimpanzees can recognize each other by their butt wrinkle pattern. I'm not making that up. That's a true story. That's a true story, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? There are other species that might look at other things that indicate that's an individual, right? For a lobster, you can recognize an individual based on their urine. That's pretty cool, right? So you can think about it the next time you go into a restroom here on campus, and you go, well, I think Dave was in here. No, not going to do that. Good. No, I don't know. Yeah.
So they're like just like get on the ground in front of you, or like
Well-
and then they're like,
So
hey, what's up? And they're like,
you have to think these guys are in an aquatic environment, right? Okay, and so they're going to be, when you release a liquid it's going to diffuse everywhere, right? It's going to kind of diffuse around into a cloud, right? And when that other lobster comes through into that territory, and they go, I know this lobster, right? And what's really important is it doesn't, like if you just want to go visit a friend, you're like, yeah, that's him. But lobsters don't really have friends. Lobsters have people they can beat up and people that have beat them up, right? And if you're a crustacean, those are kind of there are three important categories. I can mate with that member of my species. That member of my species beat me up once before, and I beat that member of my species up once before, right? And so those are kind of the three categories, and that's why it's important. Like, you go into a territory and you're like, I can take this guy. I remember him. He's not very big. He's got those little claws. They're not even the right color claws, which we'll talk about in a few moments. And then you can say like, hey, I'm just going to hang around. I'm going to, take his stuff. And then you go into another area, right, because you're kind of swimming around, and you come up on another cloud of, diluted urine, and you're like, wait a minute, this guy's really big, right? This is the guy who, like, I don't know, bench presses sea rocks. I don't know what lobsters do for a workout, but they're there, and you're like, well, that guy, I'm just gonna get away from him, right? Because you recognize that hierarchy where you fall and who those individuals are. Does that make sense? Okay. We've already talked about the mural spread, and that's actually what this crab is doing. You don't see the other crab. There's another crab kind of over in here, right? And he's doing the same thing. And he's like, okay, let's line up and let's see whose claws extend farther, and whoever that is, that's some signal, right, to another crab. Like, maybe I should reevaluate whether or not I should attack that crab. Maybe it'll increase the likelihood you attack a crab if their claws don't go out very far, but maybe you won't if they're farther out.
I was wondering, this might sound weird, but like when people started like T-posing like not that long ago to like assert dominance or whatnot, could that be linked to like the things that like crabs do, like try to make themselves bigger or like in other wildlife situations? I know that's a weird question.
T-posing.
Yeah, people just like stand around and like cast their arms out like I'm asserting dominance. It's weird. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's like a Gen Z thing. I don't get it.
Really?
Yeah, I'm serious. That makes you feel better.
So you just like walk around with your arms out? See, like I would just stare at that person as a weirdo.
No, but they do walk around with the chest out.
The chest out, that's a thing, right? I mean, that's been a thing since chests, right?
Apparently that's been a thing.
It's been a thing since crabs. So even before humans, crabs are like, look at me. And I think, how many of you have ever been to the gym, right? Anybody ever been there? Yeah. I mean, right? My favorite are the guys who grunt all the time. Man, I love that. That really, it's just like, that just really like shows me how awesome you are, like, because you can grunt. Great job. I don't know. See, now you're thinking, like, some of you are like, wait a minute. It's actually had my eye on a grunter. Like, maybe I shouldn't. So, yeah, but I mean, I think it's always a thing trying to, and we're primates, right? So you guys are aware of that. Primates are really, really set on, and some primates are worse than others about this, dominance hierarchies, right? That's pretty much a thing with any species. There's a dominance hierarchy, right? And there are different ways that you can show where you fall in that dominance hierarchy, right? As humans, we like to think maybe there's some like advanced ways that we show where we fall in a dominance hierarchy, right? Maybe Zach, it's, trucks, I don't know, right? Whatever it is. I think there are status symbols that we obviously have as humans, right? Vehicles actually being one of them, right? And different sort of subcultures have different sort of vehicular preferences. Is that right? So for some groups, maybe large trucks are awesome. Maybe for other groups, it's like expensive sports cars. Maybe for other groups, it's I don't know. You got a cool bicycle. I don't know, right? I mean, if you're like a big Tour de France fan or something, right? Maybe you're like, well, look at that guy's bicycle. It's got like, I don't know much about bicycles, but They have horns and baskets, and I don't think they let you have those on the races. That's why I don't race bicycles. So, there are different things that we might look for that are signals. You're not actually in a physical interaction, right? And some of that is, walking, with your chest out, right? Mason, there was actually an interesting, I think you might find this interesting. There was an interesting study a number of years ago. I think this was in a school in Tennessee. Yeah. Where they were looking at they were looking at whether or not, like, how closely you would walk to another person before you got out of the way, right? And so they had these guys would come in, and they had different conditions, right? And so, like, some of them they would be really nice, and then some of them they would be like really kind of mean and like try to like squeeze their hands a little bit more.
Like passing each other.
Yeah, like if two of us are walking down the hall and and there's like not enough space, and like say I'm walking down the middle of the hall and you're walking down the middle of the hall, how close do we get before we move to opposite sides, right? And so what was really interesting about this study is they had some other sort of cultural level on top of this, but they found that, if you had sort of tried to dominate someone in this, like, because they had a Confederate, right, that would kind of like set them up, if you try to dominate them, they would actually that would kind of make the person a little angry and aggressive, and they would actually get closer before they stepped out of the way. It was kind of interesting. What was also particularly interesting about this is there were some like regional and cultural influences on that, which were kind of fascinating, and they were seriously, this is really interesting, right? And so they were looking at a lot of folks who were of like from the Highlands in the British Isles, right? And they found that they would actually get closer because territory might be at a more of a premium, and you would have these kind of like family fights, right, from one family to another. It's just really sort of an interesting study. There's some other caveats and sort of complexities to that, but that might be something you're interested in. But again, it's kind of a display, right? Like, how close are you willing to get to somebody, right, before you'll actually like move out of their way. So there you go. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. Color of your claws. This matters, right? Blue apparently is a very intimidating color to crabs. And so if you have blue claws, you'll win, even if they're not as big as a set of orange claws. So there you go, right? Blue claws are preferred. So much so that you can take a crab that has orange claws that are smaller and like paint them blue, and then like other crabs will back away from them later, right? Because again, it's a signal, right? And the cool thing about signals are great if they are accurate. So accuracy matters here, right? Yeah, this says accuracy. You want me to write it again? The accuracy of the signal. Okay? So,
Glue down on the balls.
you want me to... I don't know where that's going, but I think we should...
But no, I mean, if well, there's crap that I can't really yet. I mean, the accuracy of the blue.
So what I'm saying is, the accuracy of any signal matters, right? And that's why that signal is effective. So if you're looking at an interaction between two individuals of any species, right? One of those is going to be more likely to win an aggressive encounter than the other. And that particular member of the species that's more likely to win has a set of traits, right? And whatever those traits are that actually lead to it winning, those are the traits that you're going to look for, right? Does that make sense? So those are the ones that need to be accurate. For crabs, for example, larger claws are more likely to lead to winning an aggressive interaction. Okay, and that's why they do the claw spread, right? And so they'll look to see who has bigger claws. The overwhelming majority of the time, the crab with the larger claws wins. Okay, that is a very accurate predictive signal, right? If that was not a predictive signal, and 50% of the time the crab with the larger claws won, they wouldn't bother to look at claw size. They would just go, oh, well, you're a crab and you have claws, let's fight, right? But if you can look at someone's claws and you can say, I'm more likely or less likely to win, then that gives you some information, right? And so if you think about chest puffing, for example, right? If you're going to fight someone, would you rather fight someone with a larger chest or a smaller chest? Smaller chest, they're probably weaker, right? I mean, that makes some sense if you're thinking about this sort of male-male interaction. And that's a pretty predictive, pretty accurate, right, sort of situation. So you can imagine let's put two people in a situation here. I'm gonna pick Jim Carrey because I'm trying to think about somebody who has a small chest, okay? And then I'm gonna put him in a fight with Dwayne Johnson. That seems like a fair fight, right? So let's imagine Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, right, and The Rock meet up in an aggressive interaction. What's going to happen there? Well, Jim Carrey should run. That's exactly what should happen, right? And if anybody of the human species is looking at that interaction, there are some very good predictive signals to determine who would win that fight, right? Okay, and you know, physical size and muscles and so forth and that. And so if Jim Carrey could somehow like shave his beard and cram it in his shirt and make his chest look bigger, and then maybe he can fool someone, right, Zach, by buying a bigger truck into thinking that he's going to be more likely to win aggressive interactions, right? And so that's why you might try to, you know, do some things that make you look like you're more aggressive or more likely to win an aggressive interaction than you would, but it's still, you can't lie too many times, right? Because if as a species you continue to lie too many times, that signal is no longer going to be predictive of the outcome of that interaction, and then it's going to lose any value. Does that make sense? Okay. It's pretty good, right, Caitlin?
Yeah, so where does the blue come from? Why is that?
They're crabs. It's there. You have to be like so big and healthy and strong to make blue as a crab. If you're like a smaller, weaker crab, you don't quite have the physical health and robustness, you're not going to make the color blue. You're not going to be as healthy or as physically strong and active. You know, it's very specific to that species of crab, right? It's the, you know, don't go paint your dog blue and think it's going to like scare the neighborhood dogs, right? Because it doesn't mean anything to dogs because dogs aren't blue. So don't go paint your arms blue and run around and like, look how, you know, awesome I am. I can beat you in a fight because I have blue arms. It's not going to happen. Blue is very specific just to crabs. Does that make sense? Okay. But if you have a crab, you know, and it's in the CWF, that's the Crab Wrestling Federation. I don't know if you knew that existed. Paint it blue. I mean, dip it in some blue paint every day and see what happens. It'll just like, you know, scare other crabs out of the ring. I just think about like, what are you guys going to do this weekend in your apartments, right? You're like, I'm going to go buy some crabs that are alive. Crab fight. You know. But you could do that, right? You could paint one of the crabs blue and see what happens.
Hey, back when I started college, you know, the fighting fish,
Yeah.
we used to have competitions, you know, what fish is gonna kill who. You didn't realize it takes 3 weeks for one of them to kill you.
That's
We were all sitting there going, yeah, I get it. All right. Come on.
It's a slow fight. Come back and check in on it at the end of the semester.
Well, post your luck.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. These days a good internet check would fix that, right? You kind of go like, hey, how long is this actually going to take? I want to invest my time into watching fish fight each other. All right. Other questions about that? I know it's a lot about crabs, but it applies to other species as well, too, right? That's kind of an interesting, important thing. All right, so what other kind of points can we take out of this? One, crustaceans are angry. They fight all the time. They really do. They really do. One of the reasons that they fight so much is Well, that's really the only option they have to acquire resources is to fight, right? So as a a person in this room, what options do you have to acquire resources? Obviously fighting. That's still there. That's always there. You can always go fight someone else and take their resources, Maddie. That's a perfectly natural option. Okay. Now there are rules and laws and sort of personal ethics against that, right? And so I'm not recommending that you go out and just because you can, like trip people and take their stuff, right? But there are other ways you can acquire resources, right? How many of you are here because you're trying to acquire resources? How many of you are here because your parents are no longer willing to give you resources, like there you go, right, for the rest of your life, right? And they're like, hey, you actually better get a job because you're going to have to get your own resources at some point. So you're here trying to get an education, trying to get a good job. That's going to give you access to resources, right? That's not an aggressive situation. We have that option. I don't see a lot of lobsters going to college. There's not lobster college. Even though the crabs have their own wrestling federation, they don't have college, right? So they don't have an option to go out and get a job and have someone, non-aggressively give them access to shelter and food and other such things, right? Okay, we have that option, okay, which is pretty awesome because we have more behavioral flexibility, right? We have other options to us. Now, dialing back a good bit in our history, those options weren't as available to us, right? Culturally, socially, we've developed some extra options, which is great, right? We unfortunately we still have those sort of underlying urges, though, right? Those sort of underlying motivations, even when we're thinking about something like non-aggressive, like getting a college degree, there's still some aggressive motivation behind that, right? And you still can have some sort of drive back there. So it's really, really kind of interesting to think about those biological drives that have not disappeared and will not for millennia, probably. If you want to increase aggression, a great way to do that is isolate and crowd. And I know those are two different things, and you can do either one, right? So if you want to make a lobster aggressive, put it by itself for a while, and then bring it back out, right? They do this with mice, actually. If they're going to study mouse aggression, one of the number one ways they'll do this is they'll keep mice alone for about 6 weeks, and then they'll bring them back out and put it with another mouse and see how aggressive it is, right? Okay. Crowding also. Why would crowding make a difference? Yeah, it's all about resources, right? It's about access to resources. And if we put more of you in one little space, then you're going to be more likely to be aggressive in trying to get and maintain those resources for your own survival, right? Okay. There are probably some human analogs you can think about that, right? It's like a real problem. As those of you out there in the world continue to make more of you out there in the world, resources are going to become fewer and fewer and fewer, right? We're going to have more and more people, and we're going to have to get extremely creative about acquiring and making those resources, or I think we might be on the verge of some serious aggressive interactions, right? So there you go. That's going to be exciting, right? Just wait till like all the ice melts and then like everything floods and the land gets really isolated and there's no fresh water for you. That's going to be the thing. Bottle up fresh water now. You're not going to have it the rest of your life. And then you can laugh at people who didn't listen to me. They're going to be like trying to drink salt water and it's going to kill them. Also, buy all the land you can in West Virginia, because I don't think there's any climate model that predicts West Virginia is going to flood. Land's worthless now. But in, Miriam, 20 years, when there's no East Coast, and it starts in Morgantown, you're going to be set. You just got to think ahead, right? Nobody plans ahead. You got to put the silver lining on this stuff. Nobody's doing that. I'm trying to give you good ideas, right? It's not taking. Courtship displays. How many of you don't have to answer this. How many of you ever done a courtship display? Yeah, go ahead. We've all done it, right? Prom's a good one, right? That's a courtship display. Apparently some people buying big trucks is a courtship display, right? Maybe you've got that one shirt that's cut just perfectly, that fits your body, and you're going to see so-and-so on Tuesdays, and you make sure you wear that shirt, right? Anybody do that one? Nobody's going to own up to that. I know you do, right? I know you do. It wasn't amazingly that long ago. I was on the other side of the podium, sitting over there, right, not listening to the guy up here, paying attention to somebody who was sitting out in the classroom with me. which explains why I didn't do so well those first couple years, Emily, when I was in college. I spent too much time paying attention to other things. And then finally I got it together. But, right, so courtship displays. Crayfish do it too, right? They'll parade around and they'll do their little, whatever it is they do with their antenna that looks good to another lobster. I don't know. But they have courtship displays. You guys do courtship displays as well. How many of you in the last day or so have done something with your hair? Like made sure it was clean? That's a courtship display, right? Nobody's walking around with like leaves stuck in their hair, right? You're not doing that. Okay, there you go. You don't think about those things. Some of you are thinking, maybe I should have done more to my hair. How many things? Nobody's going to own up to thinking that one, right? Maybe I should have put a brush in it. I don't know. Urine. What about urine? Why do we want to talk about urine again? Well, it's just exciting, right, to talk about urine. Urine is a great signal. We don't, as humans, we produce, and maybe we're sensitive to pheromones, right? Maybe we are. I'm going to tell you probably not. So how many of you have ever seen pheromones for sale? Like you can buy them online from those really reputable places. No, Zach, you got it. You rub your truck with pheromones. Yeah, before you drive it around town. That's what I would do. That's the way to do it right there. Humans probably aren't really that sensitive to pheromones. We might be. I don't know. There's some conflicting results there, right? Other species are very, very sensitive to pheromones, right? Crayfish in particular. You don't think about crayfish like smelling things, okay? So, right? Because they're like underwater. Like, how are they smelling stuff, right? But instead of floating around in water, we're really floating around in air, right? And it's all chemicals dissolved in some, kind of fluid, right? And so you can think about whether it's air or water, it doesn't really matter. You're still picking up on chemicals in your environment, right? So
Smell like goo or something.
Huh?
Smell like goo or something.
Absolutely, right? That's just little pieces of what floating up your nose. It could also be little pieces of chemicals that, I don't know, awesome lobster made, and it's floating around, and you're like, whoa, that was an awesome lobster right there, and you're going to be interested in it. So there you go. There are stereotypical escalation patterns. I'm not going to ask you to memorize these. I want you to know what a stereotypical escalation pattern is, right? We talked a little bit about this last week, so I gave you a great example of a stereotypical escalation pattern. Deer bark at each other, then deer walk side by side, and then deer run into each other. That's an escalation pattern, right? Okay, it's got that stereotypical pattern, okay? All species have a stereotypical escalation pattern, right? When you put two crabs together, what are they going to do? They're going to look at each other, okay? One crab's obviously that much bigger than the other, then it's in the story, right? The little crab runs away. They're kind of the same size, and they compare claws, and they look at claw color, and then they fight, right? So you have that escalation pattern. So there are things you're going to do. You're not just going to jump in and start fighting. Okay, things that lead up to that, okay? And then eventually, somebody's going to quit, okay? That might be a choice, like you decide to quit, like, hey, it's like anybody play, this was a big thing a few years ago. It may still be a big thing. I don't know. Like Texas Hold'em. How many of you are Texas Hold'em fans? Yeah, right? And so what do, Mason? You see a card or two, and then you go like, okay, well, I'm going to toss in a little money to see another card. I'm going to see another card. And then at a certain point you go, I don't have it's not worth it. I don't have the cards to support that, right? To support me going forward. Or you think,
I can look at the guy. Let me play it down.
Signaling right there, right? You're trying to signal to the other person, I've got a big hand, you better watch out. Now, if you bluff every single hand, what happens? Nobody takes you seriously, right? So you got to bluff some, you got to fold some, and sometimes you better have a good hand to back up, right? And that's exactly how it works with these sort of escalation patterns and interactions, right? You're constantly putting in some resources, right? It's a gamble. You don't know if you're going to get those back because you're going to have that interaction. You're going to see if you get those back. At some point, you might decide to quit. That might be before you've lost everything. It might be after you've lost everything, right? And that might be because you died or you went all in and you lost all your money, right? And so somebody quits. There will be changes in your escape circuit, right? We can measure those changes directly in crayfish because, again, they only have a handful of neurons. But if you think about this, if you're in an interaction with someone and you're we're back in that gambling situation, right? And you've gambled up and then you ended up losing. I thought that guy was bluffing. I'm going to have to take that information and put it into my calculations next time, right? You're going to change a little bit what you're doing. Now you're not going to change a lot necessarily based on one interaction, unless it was horrible, right? It's really bad.
That dark cloud. That's good.
Huh?
That dark cloud.
I know, right? That's what you should do. You still play Texas Hold'em? I was going to say, get you a big,
I lived in Vegas.
get you a big blue glove and just
Just I have a question on the aggressive behavior with the crustaceans.
Mhm.
Okay. Is everything wrapped around aggression, or do they have like a love bone, or? I don't mean it that way, but you know what I'm saying?
I know what you mean, yeah. So, again, I would say the overwhelming motivation of crustacean behavior is aggression. And the reason I say that is they have very, very simple nervous systems, right? They don't have a lot of opportunity for other information, other factors to come into play. And as we'll talk in a few moments, they're really driven by hormones and chemicals, right? And so the hormones and the chemicals they have floating around have a very big influence on their nervous system function, right? Humans, on the other hand, yes, aggression is a very large portion of our behavior, whether we want to admit it or not. When we don't admit it, I think we really do a disservice to understanding human behavior and describing those interactions, right? I think that's one of the things I want you to get from this class is, hey, humans are aggressive, and that's awesome. At the same time, humans are aggressive, and maybe we should work to not be as aggressive toward each other, right? But we know we're aggressive. We know we have those biological tendencies. We have the same hormones. We have the same brain chemicals. We have the same sort of circuits. That doesn't mean we necessarily have to follow that behavior to its end like a crustacean would. Once you trigger a crustacean on an aggressive behavior, well, that's kind of what's going to happen, right? It's going to kind of run till the end because it's a very stereotypical sequence of behavior. Humans, on the other hand, we have a little more flexibility. We can stop things at different times, right? All right. That was a good question. All right. I do want to introduce the idea of dominance hierarchies here. We'll talk about dominance hierarchies as we go throughout this semester. Right? So we'll talk about dominance hierarchies. It's very linear in crayfish. So there are different ways that you can have dominance hierarchies. In crayfish, what we mean by linear is there's a guy at the top, and then there's a guy below him, and there's a guy below him, and a guy below him, and it goes down like that, right? And if you are in slot 14, you can only beat people from slot 15 down, right? There's no chance you beating a guy in slot 10. It's not rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors is not linear. Rock, paper, scissors, what's your best option? Everything beats something else, and everything gets beaten by something else, right? So that's a non-linear dominance hierarchy, right? Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Once you get so far down the dominance hierarchy in crayfish, it actually has profound effects on your behavior. Profound effects. One of those is actually you stop building homes. Okay? You stop building a home. If you can't win an aggressive interaction, you're not even going to try to build a house. Why? Because you're a loser. You're not going to waste your time if you're a loser, right? You're not going to get access to food. You're not going to get access to mates. Why do you need a house? Right? Okay? I know, you feel really sad, don't you, for these crayfish, but it happens, right? Somebody's got to be a loser because somebody's got to be a winner. That's how crayfish society works. Right, Zach? So there you go. And again, it's really important to remember who beat you, so you want to smell their urine. Okay? I know, right? That's how they know. Can you imagine if it was like... anybody watch like MMA or boxing? Anybody watch any of that? Nobody wants to admit to it. That's fine. But I can just imagine, like, for the next MMA fight, they're not going to have a fight. They're just going to smell each other's urine, and then whoever they're going to go like, I think that guy can beat me. I'm just not even going to try. It's going to be safer that way, right? No broken noses, no teeth falling out. It's like smell urine. Not as exciting, right? I can see like the next pay-per-view, MMA urine smell, number 8.
Be an interesting fight to see on the street.
Yeah, you know what we should do? Maybe this is how we can reduce violence. We can just put up porta potties everywhere with little cups inside. You just step in, fill it up, swap your pee cups, and go, all right, well, you win. And just move on.
Oh, you want to step outside? I need some urine.
See,
This in this cup, what's up?
it's I don't know. I think if you get in an aggressive interaction with someone and they ask for your urine, they've won. Just they've won because they're willing to do anything to win, right? And so just as a human, if somebody says, I'm more than willing to fight you, but I will need a cup of urine first, just leave. Go ahead and leave. Get in your big pheromone-covered truck and drive off. And just don't worry about it. Because I think that's not normal, right? Sometimes I don't always know what normal behavior is, but I think asking someone for their urine is not normal. Unless it's a drug test situation. And then that's a different story. So if you're like interviewing for a job and they say, hey, can I have a cup of urine? If you run away from that, you don't get the job. Right? Just letting people know. All right.
Always.
Not always.
Hold on, it's in the car. I'll get it here.
It's in the car. Yeah, I always carry a cup around in case I get in a fight. See, now you've got a great excuse, right? Like, this guy was telling me about like fighting other folks and getting in aggressive interactions. I live in a neighborhood where, there's some muggings, and I thought, well, if I carry around a cup of urine, then maybe they can just smell it and decide whether or not they're going to, attack me or not and take my stuff. And that's why I have it in the car. So, yeah, you can make up your...
I feel like you're still not about to
You're not getting the job, are you? Yeah. You can refer them to my YouTube channel. They can listen to this lecture and be like, this is why I have that weird urine behavior.
I really want to try that on the job that I don't want at all.
just go ahead and take a cup in with you anyway. Just like, I don't know if you'll need this, but I brought it. Just try to save a step. What do you guys do with your free time? You're not already thinking about this stuff. What about like hormones and chemicals and so forth? We're going to talk about a ton of this stuff throughout the course of the semester, okay? We are going to talk about serotonin big time, right? Serotonin is one of the more important, more influential brain chemicals when it comes to aggressive behavior, right? How many of you have heard of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors? They're pretty common, right? They'll prescribe these for a number of issues, depression being one, irritability being another, right? So they'll prescribe that for irritability or other things that lead to some irritability. So typically, if you take an SSRI, you're going to increase your serotonin levels. By the way, serotonin is abbreviated 5-HT. If you want to ask why, it's because the chemical name is some long version of that has a 5, an H, and a T in it. And so that's why. That's all you need to know for now. We have it's like a whole lecture on serotonin. You guys will get tired of serotonin because it's so important. But as you increase serotonin levels, aggression goes down, risk-taking behavior goes down. You also get a little sleepy, right? Anybody knows someone or has taken an SSRI, the number one side effect, sleepiness, right? Which it's really hard to be aggressive if you're asleep. So I guess it works,
It's like Benadryl with your allergies. Like it's hard to feel your allergies if you're in a coma.
Right. Yeah, and actually the reason Benadryl works, it's an antihistamine. Histamine is actually a brain chemical that keeps you awake, and so it.
Really?
Yeah, that's exactly how that works.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Every person I know that takes Benadryl says it talks about like.
It does because it blocks their histamine, and the histamine is what you need for like arousal and vigilance and like staying awake. And so when you knock out the histamine, then people fall asleep typically. It allows the sleep center to turn on in the brain and it puts you to sleep. There are a small like percentage of people who take things like Benadryl and they get a little hyper. I don't know if anybody's in that group, right? There are a few folks. And it kind of works in some reverse way for some weird reason. So great job there. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's in that group.
I know other drugs made that way too.
Huh?
I know other drugs are made that way. Hyperactive, where they get in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Gotta be careful. All right. We could talk about steroid hormones a little bit. When we're thinking about steroid hormones and aggression, there's really only one we're thinking of primarily, although we're going to talk at some point about a handful of other hormones. Anybody have an idea what hormone that might be?
Testosterone.
Yeah, that's it, right? I mean, there's not... And here's the shocker, and please come back for the other lectures because we're going to talk about this in detail. Higher testosterone levels typically mean you're more aggressive. That's why in most species the male is more aggressive than the female. On average, males have higher testosterone levels than females, so on average their aggressive behaviors are going to be higher. It's that simple.
Do
Okay?
the other androgens affect that too? Or is it mostly testosterone?
It's mostly testosterone. I will give you a nuanced story at some point in the future. Okay. What's also really interesting is the nuanced story with maternal aggression, which is kind of interesting as well, and we'll talk about that in some detail because there's like a whole host of other hormones that aren't testosterone that might make lactating women aggressive. So the lactating part's important because there are hormones related to that, and anyway, we can talk about that when we're talking about things that lactate. Crustaceans don't. Typically, it's mammals.
So, do you think beards play a role in like when you're sizing people up? Like, you know,
Beards?
Yeah, it's like, isn't it like more testosterone?
Everybody with a beard's like.
Like more testosterone, you have like a better you are.
So I think I would say yes and no, right? And the reason I say yes and no is I think in today's society, I think having a big full beard isn't necessarily automatically going to make people go like, oh, watch that guy, he's really tough. I think there are a whole host of other features to look for. However, I think if you are in an aggressive interaction with someone, you're sizing them up, right? And their face is very smooth, so they don't have any evidence of the ability to grow a beard. I think that would be a more powerful signal than actually letting a beard grow. Does that make sense? I think historically it might have been more important, but not as much now. Does that make sense? Okay. And there are going to be variations. There are some geographical variations in the ability to grow beards. Depending on different genetic backgrounds, and I think that might culturally play a role as well at some point. But I think the ability to grow a beard, period, is going to be a signal. If you're up against somebody who can't grow a beard, I think that's going to be more important. Although we could test that, right? We could just get fake beards for everybody. We'll walk around and see what happens. I don't know that that's always going to work. I'm thinking about Santa Claus for some reason here, and I don't.
I don't need someone like that.
I don't think about Santa Claus being that aggressive, but he's got this huge beard. There are other signals I think with Santa Claus that make him less aggressive appearing, and one of those is his smaller chest and shoulders compared to his bulbous stomach, right? And I think that's how you typically see Santa. And I think that.
Yeah, I mean, like, could it be like an add-on? Like, if you don't come across a dude that's like huge, it's like a lumberjack looking dude or something like that.
And he's got a beard?
Yeah, like, could that be like an add-on? Like,
Maybe. I'm trying to think about this.
oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think its effects are going to be not as. I think they're there, but not as powerful. Does that make sense? Like, if I was like trying to like put a percentage on that, like how important is the beard? I don't know, right? But I think it's less than some other signals. Does that make sense? Because like Jim Carrey's got a big beard, right? Last time I saw him, he had some big crazy. What about David Letterman? He's had a crazy beard lately, right? I don't look at that guy as aggressive compared to like.
And his beard is perfect.
He's got a serious beard, doesn't he?
He's got a serious
beard, and I'm trying to like let's compare David Letterman to let's go back to Dwayne Johnson, no beard, right? So if I got to compare the two of them, I'm going to try to take out Letterman because I think I got a better chance there.
There's also age.
Well, I'm not against picking on old people. Yeah, I think age is a factor. And that's what I'm saying. There are a whole host of factors other than just a beard, right? A big beard's not going to compensate for being a crotchety old guy. Does that make sense? And I don't think a beard's going to make someone who is, got all the other signals. I don't know that that's going to make that big of a, right? So now I'm trying to imagine The Rock with a beard, and I just don't know that it makes a difference to me. Because I mean, he's kind of got a little beard sometimes lately, right? Like anybody seen him? I'm sure you looked at all of his wedding photos. I accidentally saw them at the grocery store, right? The Rock got married recently. You didn't know that?
You said you saw him at the grocery store.
The photos, like on the front of a magazine.
Okay.
Accidentally, not The Rock. No. The last important story I read about The Rock is when he was protesting the big telescope they're trying to build. That was an important story, right? Yeah. Yeah, him, and that's why we're not getting an Aquaman 2, right? Because I think Jason Momoa was involved in that somehow too. That seems right. Did I make that story up? Yeah. Like there. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's more important to him than people who don't live there, right? For those of you that don't know, there's a big deal going on in Hawaii. They're trying to build a massive telescope there, right, on some land that is considered sacred by native Hawaiians, right? And so they're like, hey, don't do that. That's not cool. And then other people are like, yeah, but we can see space. And so it's like these really competing interests, right, which is really kind of, to me, it's really fascinating, this debate. Because on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, I want to see space as much as anybody. And on the other hand, I'm like, I also don't want to run over people's sacred lands. That's not cool. So it's like, what are my other options?
The problem with it is that there were 2 other sites that they could have built on if
Yes.
they didn't want to.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? That's because there are other places that I think you could bulldoze and build on in Hawaii, like Mark Zuckerberg's house. I think that's probably fine. Probably people would help you tear that down. You all laughed, but every one of you has a Facebook account, I know. Now you're offended. Great.
I hear there's new property on the Big Island. New property.
Just keeps making new property. Yep. Hey, what about social status? Will affect your serotonin modulation, right? As you kind of go up in social status, things change. No worries. And I'm not going to ask you too much about this. I do want you to think briefly about it. All of these letters are abbreviations for different neurons in the crustacean nervous system that do different things. I'm not going to ask you what they do, okay? I want you to memorize that. But I want you to know this is why crustaceans are so cool, is because we can look at these, different neurons, and they control different behaviors, right? And they control different circuits, and they're not complicated. If I were to say, hey, what's the circuit that controls your eating behavior? Well, geez, you got 10 brain regions. Each one's got 4 or 5 million neurons. I don't know, right? I can't really do that. But in a crayfish, I could say, well, it's these 2 neurons right here, and we can activate those, and things can happen. Does that make sense? Questions about that? Comments, concerns? Anybody want to look up giant? I'm sure there's a place you can buy giant crab claws you can wear.